Today, I'm going to tell you the story of Aiyana, an Apache girl who lost everything in a devastating fire. Found sleeping in the ashes behind a ranch, she was taken in by Thomas Martinez, a lonely rancher who would change her life forever. This is a touching story of overcoming and hope, but the outcome exceeded all expectations. Please subscribe to our channel and comment where you're listening to this story from. Ashes and embers. The Arizona desert stretched endlessly under a merciless August sun, its red clay cracked like broken pottery. Behind the weathered fence of the Martinez ranch, where tumbleweeds gathered like forgotten prayers, a small figure lay curled in the shadow of burned timber and cold ashes. Aiyana pressed her face against the rough ground, her dark hair matted with dust and sorrow. 3 days had passed since the fire consumed everything she had ever known. 3 days since her grandmother's voice had fallen silent forever. The acrid smell of destruction still clung to her torn dress, a constant reminder of the night that changed everything. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but she dared not move. Through the fence slats, she could see the ranch house in the distance, its white walls gleaming like a mirage. She had heard the stories whispered by her people about the white ranchers, about children who disappeared and never returned home. Fear kept her frozen in place, even as thirst made her lips crack and bleed. "Please, grandmother," she whispered in Apache, her voice barely audible above the desert wind, "tell me what to do." But only silence answered, broken by the distant lowing of cattle and the creak of windmill blades spinning lazily in the breeze. Aiyana closed her eyes, remembering her grandmother's weathered hands braiding her hair, teaching her the old songs, showing her which plants could heal and which could harm. The sun climbed higher, beating down on her small frame like a hammer on an anvil. Her throat burned with each shallow breath. In the distance, she heard the rumble of a truck engine growing closer, and panic seized her chest. She tried to make herself smaller, pressing deeper into the ashes that had become her only shelter. The engine stopped. A door slammed shut. Heavy boots crunched on gravel, growing closer with each step. Aiyana's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She squeezed her eyes shut tighter, hoping to disappear entirely, to become one with the earth that held her grandmother's memory. "Well, I'll be damned," a deep voice said in English, filled with surprise rather than anger. Aiyana's eyes snapped open to find a tall man standing above her, his weathered cowboy hat casting a shadow across his sun-lined face. This was Thomas Martinez, though she didn't know his name yet. His blue eyes, the color of winter sky, studied her with a mixture of concern and disbelief. "Little one," he said softly, crouching down to her level. "How long have you been out here?" She didn't understand his words, but his tone was gentler than she expected. Still, she remained motionless, every muscle in her body coiled like a spring. Thomas noticed the burns on her arms, the way her small chest rose and fell with labored breathing. "Jesus," he muttered under his breath, then spoke louder, slower. "Are you hurt? Do you need help?" When she didn't respond, he stood and walked back to his truck. Aiyana watched through half-closed eyes as he returned with a bottle of water and a cloth. He set them on the ground between them, then backed away several steps. "Water," he said simply, pointing to the bottle. "Agua." The Spanish word sparked recognition in her mind. Her grandmother had taught her some Spanish alongside Apache and the little English she knew. Aiyana's gaze fixed on the bottle, her throat constricting with desperate need. Thomas remained perfectly still, his hands visible and empty. "It's okay," he said softly. "Take it." After what felt like an eternity, Aiyana's trembling hand reached out and grasped the bottle. She drank greedily, water spilling down her chin and onto her dusty dress. The cool liquid felt like salvation against her parched throat. Thomas watched with growing concern, taking in her obvious malnourishment, the purple shadows beneath her eyes, and the haunted look that spoke of unspeakable loss. "Where's your family?" he asked gently, knowing she probably wouldn't understand, but needing to try. At the word family, Aiyana's composure finally cracked. Tears carved clean paths through the dirt on her cheeks as she pointed toward the blackened remains visible in the distance. Her small hand shook as she gestured, and a broken sob escaped her lips. Thomas followed her gesture and understood immediately. The fire that had swept through the reservation 3 days ago had taken more than just buildings. It had stolen her entire world. "I'm sorry," he said, and somehow the sincerity in his voice transcended language barriers. As the afternoon sun continued its relentless assault, Thomas Martinez found himself facing a decision that would change both their lives forever. This broken child, this daughter of the desert, had somehow found her way to his doorstep. Her small frame seemed impossibly fragile against the vast emptiness surrounding them. And despite everything he'd been taught about maintaining boundaries, about the complications that could arise, he knew he couldn't simply walk away. The ashes behind his ranch had delivered him something precious and fragile, something that desperately needed protecting. The question was whether he had the courage to step across the invisible lines that divided their worlds, to risk everything for a child who had already lost everything she had ever known. Crossing the threshold, Thomas Martinez had built his life on certainties. Sunrise at 5:30, cattle fed by 7, fences checked before noon. For 23 years, the Martinez Ranch had operated like clockwork, a testament to order in the midst of Arizona's untamed wilderness. But now, staring down at this fragile Apache girl, every certainty crumbled like desert sand through his weathered fingers. "We can't stay out here," he said gently, though he knew she understood little of his English. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, but the desert's heat still radiated from the baked earth beneath them. Aiyana remained huddled against the fence, clutching the empty water bottle like a lifeline. Her dark eyes tracked Thomas's every movement, alert as a wild animal ready to bolt. She had heard her grandmother's warnings about the white man's world, about children who vanished into their houses and emerged changed, stripped of their Apache souls. Thomas knelt slowly, his knees protesting against the hard ground. At 52, his body carried the accumulated weight of decades spent working this harsh land. "I know you're scared," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "but you'll die out here if you stay." He pointed toward the ranch house, then back to her, then made a drinking motion with his hand. "Food, water, safe." He repeated the Spanish word he knew. "Seguro." Aiyana's stomach betrayed her with a loud growl that echoed in the evening stillness. She hadn't eaten since the morning of the fire, when her grandmother had prepared their last meal together, blue corn mush sweetened with wild honey. The memory brought fresh tears, but also a gnawing hunger that made her limbs tremble. Thomas stood slowly and walked to his truck, returning with a wrapped sandwich and a thermos. He set them down halfway between them and backed away, giving her space. "It's just ham and cheese," he said. "Nothing fancy, but it's food." The smell reached her first, bread and meat and something else she couldn't identify. Her grandmother had taught her to be cautious of foreign food, but survival instincts overrode cultural teachings. She crawled forward on hands and knees, unwrapped the sandwich with shaking fingers, and took a tentative bite. The taste was strange, different from anything in her Apache world, but her starving body didn't care. She devoured it in desperate bites, then drank from the thermos, coffee, bitter and strong, but warm and life-giving. Thomas watched this small act of trust with something approaching reverence. "That's it," he murmured. "You're okay now." As shadows lengthened across the desert floor, he knew they were running out of time. Coyotes would emerge with darkness, and the temperature would plummet. This child, already weakened by days of exposure, wouldn't survive another night in the open. "I'm going to take a step closer," he announced, though she couldn't understand his words. His tone remained steady, calm. "Just one step." Aiyana tensed, but didn't flee. Something in this man's manner reminded her of her grandfather, dead these 5 years, who had moved with the same careful deliberation around wounded animals. Thomas extended his hand, palm up, empty. "My name is Thomas," he said, pointing to himself. "Thomas." She stared at his outstretched hand, remembering her grandmother's stories about the power of names, about how sharing them created bonds that transcended tribal boundaries. After a long moment, she whispered her own name in Apache, then repeated it more clearly. Aiyana, Aiyana, Thomas repeated, mangling the pronunciation but trying. It's beautiful. The sound of her name in his foreign mouth should have felt wrong, but somehow it didn't. There was respect in how he said it, an acknowledgement of her identity that surprised her. "Will you come with me, Aiyana?" Thomas asked, gesturing toward the house. "Just for tonight. You can leave in the morning if you want." She didn't understand all his words, but she grasped his meaning. The offer hung between them like a bridge across a canyon, dangerous to cross, but perhaps more dangerous to refuse. The desert wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and the distant howl of a coyote. Aiyana looked back toward the burned remains of her former life, then at the ranch house, where warm yellow light glowed in the windows. Her grandmother was gone. Her home was ashes. This strange white man was offering shelter, and she was tired of being afraid. Slowly, painfully, she struggled to her feet. Her legs nearly buckled after days of inactivity, but Thomas resisted the urge to help, sensing that she needed to make this choice herself. Step by step, she walked toward him, toward his truck, toward a future she couldn't imagine. "That's brave," Thomas said softly as she reached the passenger door. "That's real brave." He opened the door and helped her into the seat, noting how light she felt, like a bird with hollow bones. As they drove the short distance to the house, Aiyana pressed her face to the window, watching the world outside transform from the familiar chaos of desert into the ordered geometry of human habitation. The ranch house rose before them, larger than it had appeared from a distance, its white walls glowing in the twilight. Thomas parked near the front porch and came around to help her down, but she had already climbed out, studying this new environment with the intense focus of someone whose survival depended on reading every detail correctly. "Welcome to your new home," Thomas said, then caught himself. He didn't know if this would be her home, didn't know what tomorrow would bring. All he knew was that tonight, this Apache girl named Aiyana would sleep safely under his roof, and that somehow in the space of a few hours, his carefully ordered world had expanded to include someone who desperately needed what he had to offer. Inside strange walls, the interior of the Martinez ranch house felt like stepping into another world entirely. Aiyana's bare feet touched cool tiled floors that seemed impossibly smooth compared to the rough earth she knew. Electric lights banished the desert darkness with harsh brightness that made her squint and shield her eyes. Everything smelled different here. Furniture polish, coffee grounds, and something floral she couldn't identify. Thomas watched her carefully as she took tentative steps into his living room, her head turning constantly to catalogue potential exits and threats. 23 years of living alone had left the house sparse but comfortable, filled with heavy wooden furniture and faded photographs of cattle drives and rodeos from his younger days. "It's okay," he said softly, noticing how she flinched at every creak of the old house settling. "You're safe here." But Aiyana felt anything but safe. The walls seemed to press in around her, trapping her in this strange white man's world. She could hear unfamiliar sounds, the hum of a refrigerator, the tick of a clock, the distant rumble of an air conditioning unit. Each noise made her muscles tense, ready to run back to the familiar dangers of the desert. Thomas disappeared into what she would later learn was the kitchen, returning with a glass of milk and a plate of crackers with peanut butter. He set them on the coffee table and gestured for her to sit on the couch, but Aiyana remained standing, pressed against the wall near the front door. "You don't have to eat if you don't want to," Thomas said, settling into his worn leather recliner. "But it's there if you get hungry." The milk caught her attention first. Her grandmother had sometimes traded with Mexican ranchers for goat milk, but this was different, richer, creamier. She approached the coffee table like a cautious deer, snatched the glass, and retreated to her corner. The taste was strange but satisfying, coating her parched throat with coolness. As she drank, Thomas studied her more carefully than he had been able to outside. She was younger than he'd initially thought, maybe 11 or 12 years old. Her long black hair hung in tangled ropes down her back, and her cotton dress, once probably colorful, was now stained with smoke and dirt. But it was her eyes that held him, dark and intelligent, filled with a wariness that spoke of wisdom earned too young. "You remind me of someone," Thomas said quietly, more to himself than to her. "My sister Aiyana. She had that same look when we first brought her home from the orphanage." Aiyana didn't understand his words, but she sensed something change in his voice, a softness, a memory that brought both pain and warmth. She found herself studying his face more closely. The lines around his eyes spoke of years spent squinting into desert sun, but there was kindness there too, something that reminded her of her grandfather's gentle nature. The crackers disappeared quickly once she decided they were safe. Thomas noted how she ate, quickly, defensively, as if someone might take the food away at any moment. It broke his heart to see such hunger, such fear in someone so young. "Tomorrow we'll get you cleaned up," he said, gesturing toward a hallway that led to the bathroom. "Get you some proper clothes. But tonight, you just need to rest." He stood slowly, and Aiyana tensed, ready to bolt. But Thomas only walked to a closet and pulled out an old quilt, one his mother had made years ago, covered in a pattern of blue and white stars. He draped it over the back of the couch and pointed to it. "You can sleep here tonight," he said. "It's comfortable. I'll be right down the hall if you need anything." Aiyana stared at the quilt, at the couch that looked impossibly soft compared to the hard ground she'd been sleeping on. But the idea of lying down, of closing her eyes in this strange place, terrified her. What if this man's kindness was just a trap? What if she woke up to find herself somewhere even worse? Thomas seemed to understand her hesitation. "I know you don't trust me yet," he said. "That's smart. Your grandmother taught you well." He pointed to himself, then made a sleeping gesture, then pointed down the hallway. "I sleep there, you sleep here, door stays open. You can leave any time you want." He picked up his keys from the side table and placed them on the coffee table within her reach. "Truck keys," he said, patting his chest, then pointing to the keys. "If you need to go, you take these, okay?" The gesture stunned her. In her world, weapons and tools were never shared with strangers, never left where enemies could reach them. Yet this man was giving her the means to steal his vehicle, to escape, to leave him stranded. It was either an act of incredible trust or incredible foolishness. Thomas moved toward the hallway, then paused. "Aiyana," he said, pronouncing her name more carefully this time. "I lost someone too, a long time ago. I know how it feels to be alone." Something in his tone made her look up, made her really see him for the first time. Behind his weathered exterior, she glimpsed a pain that matched her own, the hollow ache of profound loss, the exhaustion that came from carrying grief too heavy for one person to bear. "Good night," Thomas said simply, and disappeared into the shadows of the hallway. Aiyana remained pressed against the wall for what felt like hours, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house around her. She heard Thomas moving around in his room, heard water running, heard the creak of bed springs as he settled in for the night. Then, gradually, silence fell over the ranch house. The couch seemed to call to her tired body. The quilt looked warm and inviting. Her legs ached from days of sleeping on hard ground, and her back screamed for relief. But still she hesitated, torn between exhaustion and the survival instincts that had kept her alive. Finally, when she could stand no longer, she approached the couch tentatively. She touched the fabric, softer than anything she'd ever felt. She sat on the edge, then slowly, carefully, lay down and pulled the quilt over her small frame. For the first time in days, warmth enveloped her completely. The cushions cradled her aching body, and the quilt smelled faintly of lavender and old memories. Despite her fears, despite her uncertainty about this strange white man and his foreign world, Aiyana felt her eyelids growing heavy. As sleep finally claimed her, she whispered a prayer in Apache to her grandmother's spirit, asking for guidance, for protection, for the wisdom to know whether this Thomas Martinez was truly the salvation he appeared to be, or just another danger in a world that had already taken everything she loved. Dawn of new beginnings. The first rays of Arizona sunrise filtered through the ranch house windows, painting golden stripes across the living room floor. Aiyana woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the soft cushions beneath her and the unfamiliar ceiling above. For a heart-stopping moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back. She was alive, she was warm, and she was in the house of a white rancher who had shown her more kindness in one evening than she'd expected to find in a lifetime. The smell of bacon frying drifted from the kitchen, making her stomach clench with hunger. She had slept deeply for the first time since the fire, and her body was finally beginning to remember what it felt like to feel safe. Still, she remained motionless on the couch, listening for any sign that Thomas had changed his mind about helping her. "Morning, Aiyana," came his voice from the kitchen, gentle and respectful. "I'm making breakfast. You hungry?" She sat up slowly, the quilt falling away from her shoulders. Thomas appeared in the doorway, already dressed in work clothes, faded jeans, a plaid shirt, and boots worn smooth by years of ranch work. His silver-streaked hair was damp from washing, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own space. "Sleep okay?" he asked, though he could see the answer in her face. The haunted look was still there, but some of the desperate fear had faded. She nodded slightly, and Thomas smiled. "Good. Come on, let's get some food in you." The kitchen was warm and filled with morning light, streaming through gingham curtains. Thomas had set 2 places at a small wooden table, one for himself and one for her. The sight of it made Aiyana's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. When was the last time someone had set a place for her at a table? When was the last time she'd been expected, welcomed, included? Thomas served her eggs, bacon, and toast, food she'd never eaten before, but which smelled incredible. He poured her a glass of orange juice and set it beside her plate, then took his own seat across from her. "Before we eat," Thomas said quietly, "I need to tell you something important." Aiyana looked up from her plate, suddenly tense. This was it, the moment when the kindness would end, when the conditions would be revealed, when she would learn what this man really expected from her. Thomas seemed to sense her fear. "It's nothing bad," he assured her. "I just need you to know that you have choices here, always. If you want to stay, you can stay. If you want to go back to your people, I'll help you find them. If you want to go somewhere else entirely, I'll help with that too. This isn't a prison, Aiyana. This is just a safe place while you figure out what you want to do next." She didn't understand all his words, but she grasped his meaning. Choice, freedom, the very things that had been stripped away when the fire took her grandmother and left her with nothing. "But while you're here," Thomas continued, cutting into his eggs, "we'll need to figure out some things, like getting you enrolled in school, getting you some proper clothes, maybe teaching you a bit more English, and you can teach me some Apache if you want." School. The word sent a chill through her. She had heard stories about the government schools where Apache children were sent, where they cut your hair and forbade you to speak your own language, where they tried to kill everything that made you who you were. Thomas noticed her reaction immediately. "Not a government school," he said quickly. "The local school here in town. It's small, friendly. The teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, she speaks Spanish and English both. She understands about different cultures." Aiyana began to eat, partly from hunger and partly to give herself time to think. The eggs were rich and creamy, the bacon salty and satisfying. Each bite seemed to restore not just her physical strength, but something deeper, a sense that perhaps survival was possible, that perhaps there could be life beyond mere existence. "I know this is all strange," Thomas said between bites. "I know I'm strange to you, but I want you to know something. Taking you in isn't some kind of charity project for me. It's not about me being a good person or trying to save anyone." He paused, looking out the window toward the desert where he'd found her. "I've been alone on this ranch for a long time, maybe too long. Yesterday, When I saw you there in those ashes, it reminded me that sometimes the desert gives you exactly what you need, even when you didn't know you needed it. Aiyana studied his face as he spoke, beginning to understand that this arrangement might benefit both of them. She needed shelter, food, protection. He needed, what? Company, purpose, someone to care for. After breakfast, Thomas showed her to the bathroom and provided her with towels, soap, and a set of clothes that had belonged to his sister Eleanor years ago. A simple blue dress that would be too big, but manageable with a belt. "Take your time," he said. "I'll be outside checking on the cattle." The bathroom was another marvel. Hot water that came from the walls, mirrors that showed her reflection with startling clarity, a bathtub deep enough to submerge her entire body. As she washed away days of dirt and grief, Aiyana felt layers of despair sloughing off with the grime. The girl who emerged from that bathroom was still Apache, still grieving, still uncertain about the future, but she was also clean, fed, and for the first time since the fire, hopeful. She found Thomas on the front porch, sipping coffee and watching the sunrise paint the desert in shades of rose and gold. He looked up when she appeared, and his face broke into a genuine smile. "You look better," he said simply. "Feel better?" She nodded, settling onto the porch steps beside his chair. The morning air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of another scorching day to come. But for now, in this moment, sitting beside this unexpected ally, Aiyana felt something she hadn't experienced since her grandmother's death: peace. "So," Thomas said, setting down his coffee cup, "what do you say we start with some English lessons? And maybe you can teach me how to pronounce your name properly." Aiyana looked out at the vast expanse of desert that stretched to the horizon, at the land that had taken everything from her and then, somehow, delivered her to safety. Her grandmother's voice seemed to whisper on the wind, telling her that sometimes the greatest courage lay not in fighting fate, but in embracing the unexpected gifts it offered. "Yes," she said in careful English, the word strange on her tongue but filled with possibility. "Yes, I would like that." Thomas smiled, and in that smile Aiyana saw the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Not just survival, but the chance to build something new from the ashes of what they'd both lost. The desert had brought them together, two wounded souls finding solace in each other's company, and perhaps that was exactly what they both needed to begin healing.